It seems that every time an African leader decides to distance their country from the West, particularly France, the next thing we hear is either an assassination attempt or the media calling them a corrupt leader and a dictator. This pattern has played out repeatedly throughout history, with examples like President Traoré, Colonel Ine Goa, General Tiani, Thomas Sankara, Patrice Lumumba, and Muammar Gaddafi, to name a few. Currently, the same scenario has unfolded with the president of Chad, Mahamat Idriss Déby. A few days ago, the Chadian president was the target of an assassination attempt that thankfully failed, all thanks to the Chadian military. But the big question is, who is behind the attack and why? If you are new to our channel, please leave a like as well as a sub so you never miss another video. On the night of January 8, 2025, the capital of Chad, N'Djamena, was the scene of a violent clash between Chad's security forces and a group of over a dozen armed attackers who stormed the presidential palace. According to Chadian Foreign Minister Abdin Koulala, around 24 heavily armed men attacked the president's office around 8:45 p.m., armed with knives rather than guns. The attack occurred while President Mahamat Idriss Déby Itno was inside the palace, meeting with Chadian leaders and the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, who was visiting the country. In the ensuing gunfight, at least 18 of the attackers were killed, and one member of the Chadian security forces also died. Koulala said the attackers managed to breach the security perimeter around the presidency, but he praised the military's response, stating, "We have a very good army, and the Chadians can sleep soundly. Our country is well guarded. At least 6 people have been arrested in connection with the attack, though their identities remain unclear as the investigation continues." After the attack and the military's intervention, normalcy has returned to N'Djamena, with businesses, schools, and government offices reopening as the public was assured that the situation was under control. However, the day after the incident, Chadian citizens have strongly condemned the violence, calling for peace, dialogue, and democratic means to resolve political issues. Bamaji Desire, the president of the Association of Young Rainbows for Social Stability in Africa, criticized the culture of violence that he said does not reflect the aspirations of the younger generation. The Chadian Youth Parliament also denounced the attack as a senseless act, with its president, James Bachara Bachir, stating that, "You have to be an unconscious young person to attack the symbol of our sovereignty, and that Chad has suffered too much from violence, which must stop." There are conflicting theories about who was behind the attack. Some suggest it may have been a retaliation by jihadist groups, given Chad's role in the regional fight against insurgency. However, the government has dismissed this, with Koulala describing the attackers as drunken pieds noirs, a reference to hapless criminals. But the fact that a group of seemingly disorganized individuals could breach the heart of Chad's government has raised questions. Takal, a national advisor and the president of the Front for the Liberation of Chad party, believes the attack was a result of France's resistance to Chad's efforts to assert its independence. Takal argued that France views Chad as a free aircraft carrier and is unwilling to relinquish its influence in the country. He also suggested that France exaggerated the significance of the attack, calling it a coup in order to create the impression that Chad cannot solve its problems without Western intervention. This perspective gains credibility when considering the recent statements made by French President Emmanuel Macron, who claimed that the Sahel states owe France gratitude for preventing them from succumbing to militant control. Macron's comments, which were rebuked by Chad, hint at France's frustration as the country seeks to distance itself from French influence. In the aftermath of this attack, Chad faces the challenge of strengthening its internal security and political systems to withstand both external and internal threats to its stability and sovereignty. Thomas Sankara was an exceptional leader who exemplified what a true leader should be. He was the opposite of today's African presidents who live lavishly in their big mansions, drive exotic cars, and enjoy the good things of life while the people they are leading live in poverty and penury. Sankara rode a bicycle to work as prime minister and later as president, before upgrading to a Renault 5, one of the cheapest automobiles available in Burkina Faso at the time. At the demand of his cabinet, he lived in a small brick house and exclusively wore cotton that was grown, woven, and sewn in Burkina Faso. His mindset was different from every other leader. When he came to power, Sankara reasoned that Burkina Faso was the way it was because of the political leaders, so he decided to change the status quo of things. He put an end to politicians living extravagant lives funded by taxpayers' money and cut down the salaries of every politician, including himself. The Mercedes-Benz fleet for high-ranking officials was phased out and replaced by Renault 5s. The wealth from land and oil was nationalized, and his reign brought about a change in the health, education, and environmental sectors of Burkina Faso. Mass vaccination efforts were launched with a speed and success that was unusual for an African country at the time. Infant mortality rates fell, school attendance rates doubled, and millions of trees were planted as part of a long-term effort to combat deforestation. Feminism was also a fundamental component of Sankara's political philosophy, manifesting itself in increased access to education for girls and the involvement of women in positions of leadership. Sankara even went further to institute a day of solidarity in which men swapped typical gender responsibilities, such as going to the market and running the family, in order to better understand what women face on a daily basis. It was the biggest success story in African history, until it was interrupted in blood in 1987. Sankara was 37 when he was gunned down on October 15, 1987, along with 12 other men. His life was cut short by a gunshot which, according to witnesses, was ordered by former Liberian President Charles Taylor with the cooperation of the French and American governments and delivered by Blaise Compaoré, Sankara's longtime friend and colleague. Sankara remains one of the continent's admired leaders, and his vision of Pan-African flourishing and an end to colonialism have long remained his legacy. Another African leader who was murdered with the support of France was Sylvanus Olympio of Togo. Togo's journey to independence can never be spoken of without talking about Sylvanus Olympio, the man who helped the country reach independence from France and paid the price for it. To frustrate Olympio and the Togolese population's desire for independence and self-government, France demanded a payment of 800 million francs from the tiny West African colony, with meager earnings to cover the cost of the so-called benefit of French colonization. Understanding that France was trying to keep their hold on the country, Olympio immediately set to work for 2 years, putting Togo's land and human resources to use in order to compensate France. Yet, after paying France this colossal amount and gaining nominal independence, General Charles de Gaulle refused to relinquish control because he considered that all French colonies, independent or not, were France's property. To break his country free from French hold, Olympio decided to abandon the CFA franc currency, which had been imposed on France's colonies at gunpoint in 1945. This decision, however, did not go well with Paris, and so France decided to act. According to the African Liaison Tour, 2 days before Olympio was scheduled to sign the withdrawal agreement of Togo from the CFA francs currency at the Bank of France, with the assistance of the US, orchestrated his assassination. He was assassinated in a military coup in the US Embassy compound in 1963 by Gnassingbé Eyadema, one of Africa's worst dictators, backed by the West. The story of French interference in African affairs doesn't end there. Felix Moumie, the famous independence fighter of Cameroon, also called Cameroun's Lumumba, died in Geneva following an official independence from France earlier that year. Moumie was the leader of the political movement Union of the Cameroonian People, UPC, a major political force demanding the end of UN trusteeship over Cameroon and full independence of the country. Sadly, he was poisoned by thallium by an agent of the French Secret Service. The Swiss authorities knew who assassinated Moumie, but under pressure from Paris, never indicted him and dismissed proceedings, and no one has been charged since. Cameroon was strategically important to the French government. Paris feared that if they were defeated by Moumie's UPC, a left-wing independence movement, France would lose not only Cameroon, but also other possessions in Western and Central Africa. And so, Felix Moumie had to disappear, and his movement had to be eliminated at any price. Following a mission to Geneva in October 1960, Felix was invited to dinner on the eve of his return to Kaheri by 66-year-old William Beckel, who claimed to be a journalist. Unfortunately, it was at that dinner that Felix was poisoned with thallium by William, who was a member of the French assassination unit called L'Homme Rouge. The pattern is clear. Whenever an African leader challenges Western, particularly French influence, they become targets for assassination or face a barrage of negative media portrayals. The cases of Sankara, Olympio, and Moumie show that France has a history of orchestrating the removal of leaders who dare to defy its interests in Africa. Given this track record, it would not be far-fetched to say that the recent assassination attempt on the Chadian president could also be the work of France. After all, Mahamat Idriss Déby's decision to end the defense pact with France and the Chadian government's rebuke of Macron's statements are clear signs that Chad is seeking to distance itself from French influence. France has enjoyed a long-standing relationship with Chad, and the installation of Mahamat as the interim president was a move to maintain that influence. The fact that Chad is now seeking to break free from this relationship is a significant blow to France's regional ambitions. It is not surprising, then, that France would resort to desperate measures, including orchestrating an assassination attempt to preserve its grip on the country. The message is clear. African leaders who dare to challenge Western, particularly French, dominance in the continent do so at their own peril. The ghosts of Sankara, Olympio, and Moumie serve as a stark reminder that the forces of neocolonialism are still at work, and they will stop at nothing to maintain their grip on the continent. As the world watches the unfolding events in Chad, it is crucial that the international community remains vigilant and holds France accountable for any potential involvement in the latest attack. The future of African sovereignty and self-determination hangs in the balance, and the continent cannot afford to let the sacrifices of its past heroes be in vain. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like as well as a sub so more people can see this.